Hey everyone, this is Christian, and today I'd like to talk about 4 easy Kubernetes projects for beginners. And yes, you heard it right, I just said easy and Kubernetes in the same sentence. I know Kubernetes is well known for many amazing things in IT, but definitely not for being beginner friendly. Nevertheless, I believe it's absolutely worth learning it, especially if you are into IT automation or DevOps, and there are, even for beginners, some really great projects to effectively learn it. Because in my opinion, the best way to learn something new is by just starting a project that is exciting, like I did when I deployed my own Kubernetes cluster on some virtual machines on Proxmox. And that is exactly what this video is about. I will just talk a bit about that experience and how I've managed to learn all the important skills in Kubernetes, but in a practical way that is also a lot of fun. I know Kubernetes is a hell of a beast and it has so many different components you have to learn about, terminologies, and it can be really complex and overwhelming for beginners. I totally get this. And that's why I always say you should have at least some prior knowledge about Linux, networking, and Docker, otherwise it might be a bit hard. Of course, you don't have to be an expert in everything, but you should familiarize yourself with the command line, install some applications in containers and so on before actually learning Kubernetes. And the best way to do this is by setting up a Linux VPS on Hostinger, the sponsor of today's video. Hostinger is a great platform for running virtual private servers to host websites, game servers, or any other application you might like to run on Linux. They use high-performance components like NVMe SSDs and modern AMD EPYC CPUs, and they also have enhanced security features on board like DDoS filtering and a malware scanner, a pretty cool feature that not many other providers offer you. You also get free automatic backups and snapshots for all of your servers, and you can use their one-click applications to install any web hosting frameworks or content management systems like WordPress. But of course, if you prefer to use their wide range of Linux distros and learn to install everything yourself, like I would recommend you to do, you also have full root access to nerd out as much as you want. Just choose your desired VPS plan on Hostinger depending on how many resources you need, for example the KVM2 plan, then pick your data center location and your desired operating system and deployments, set your password or upload your public SSH key, and in a few minutes your Linux server is ready. So make sure to check out Hostinger, use the link hostinger.com/lempa to get an additional discount for all the yearly plans. Note, this is a limited time deal, so be fast and make sure to use my code LEMPA when you check out. You'll also find that in the description box down below. And now, let's get back into Kubernetes beginner projects. Alright, so let's assume you're doing pretty well on Linux and Docker so far, and now you want to take it to the next level and start learning Kubernetes. The first project that got me started and where I have learned so much about Kubernetes was by just installing my own self-hosted high available Kubernetes cluster in my home lab and setting up everything myself. Some tutorials try to sneak around that topic and recommend using a cloud service like Linode or DigitalOcean to get started, or use tools like Minikube and Docker Desktop in your local workstation to run a single node instance of Kubernetes on your regular desktop computer, so that you don't have to worry about the architecture. You just click a few buttons or run a single command in the terminal and then you're ready to go. But honestly, I think you're missing so much when you're getting started with Kubernetes that way, because to really understand how it works, I think you have to go through that initial learning process by installing a high available cluster on more than one server yourself. Because it will practically teach you many of the critical concepts in Kubernetes, because there it's all about high availability. If you just want a single node server, why the hell don't you just run Docker? And trying to cut corners by just using a cloud service is not a good way either. However, I'd also not try to install Kubernetes from scratch. What I'd recommend you to get started is by taking a look at tools like K3s. This is a lightweight Kubernetes distribution made for IoT and edge computing, which you can easily install and deploy on some virtual machines. So just use a hypervisor like VirtualBox on your workstation or Proxmox if you've got a home server. I'm sure you know how that all works. And then deploy a 2-node or a 3-node cluster using the installation scripts of K3s. I've already made a tutorial video about this, so when you want to watch it, I'll link you that in the description. And by the way, I'm also just planning a brand new video project by setting up a K3s cluster on some Raspberry Pis. So if you're interested in that and you want to follow me for more tutorials, then please don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to the channel to not miss any future videos. But yeah, this is a great way to get started in my opinion, because K3s is an awesome platform that is well documented, and it's also simple enough to deploy it with a few commands. So even for a beginner, I'm pretty sure you can set up a high available Kubernetes cluster with K3s. But you still have to learn and familiarize yourself a bit with the architecture behind it. So for example, if you want to run a high available Kubernetes cluster in K3s that is functional, you have to learn about the database structure with etcd, or find out how many master nodes you actually need to make it high available, or how do you add additional worker nodes to your cluster, and how you route network traffic to your devices. I agree, it is a lot of stuff that you have to read and learn as a beginner, but I can just tell you from my own experience with this project that it has helped me a ton to understand the architecture of Kubernetes. You will have many of these moments where you read something in the K3s documentation and suddenly realize, that's why it is done that way. So please don't miss this step even as a beginner. Don't be afraid of installing a high available Kubernetes cluster to run your projects. And if you need a few tries, so be it, yeah, that's just how it works in IT. But it's undeniably the best way to make good learning progress. So the next cool project that will easily teach you Kubernetes skills as a beginner is by installing and setting up a Kubernetes management tool for your cluster. Some of those even come with a nice web UI where you can administrate the entire environment in an easy and straightforward way. I'm aware, I just said don't use cloud providers to click a few buttons for installing Kubernetes, and now I'm suggesting you to click a few buttons to administrate it. But to defend my point, the management UIs of Kubernetes are not really taking away any necessary skills from you, like skipping the entire installation process. I see a management tool more like a way to discover new things in Kubernetes. Like if you just take a look at Lens, for example, which is a great Kubernetes management tool you can use for free, by the way. If you connect this to your cluster, you can discover so many interesting and exciting areas that you might not know before. For instance, you can see, oh, there's a difference between deployments, daemon sets, stateful sets, and replica sets. So maybe I should look up what those differences are and when to use what. Also, the networking section can give you much more insight into how Kubernetes uses service objects, IP addresses, how it does routing, and so on. Sometimes it is just interesting to click through the different menus and try to understand what is behind those options and what the hell is going on in the background. Maybe it's just because I'm a bit weird, but sometimes I like to find out things myself instead of reading a documentation or following a YouTube tutorial. I generally like to explore something weird or something new by trial and error. And only when I don't understand it or when something does not work, so then I go and read the documentation or I experiment with it to see how a particular item functions. I think this is much more rewarding to fix a problem completely by yourself than just following a tutorial. And installing a Kubernetes management tool can really help you exploring Kubernetes in such a fun way and discover the unknown areas of the technology. Of course, it doesn't have to be a specific management tool. I just mentioned Lens because I think it's nice. I know some people might not like it because it's not fully open source. But then you can just use any other different tool, like for example install Rancher, or maybe for beginners it might be better to use something simpler like Portainer. Those two are also great Kubernetes management tools. And trust me, using those tools, especially in the beginning of your learning progress, will tremendously help you to understand Kubernetes better. By the way, I once did a video comparison about some interesting Kubernetes management tools like Rancher, Portainer, and also Lens, so I'll link you that in the description box down below as well, if you might need some inspirations. Alright, so far we have mostly covered project ideas that will teach you more about the Kubernetes architecture itself, like installing and managing. But of course, there are also some cool and exciting deployment projects that you can learn a lot from. And one would be deploying a load balancer and an Ingress controller to your cluster. This is another critical concept in understanding how Kubernetes achieves high availability, so I'd never skip this topic in the beginning of your learning progress. It will also teach you the difference between a Kubernetes service load balancer like MetalLB or KubeVip and Ingress controllers like Nginx or Traffic, which are technically also load balancers, but there is a difference between the two types. And you can learn a lot about IP routing, virtual IP addresses, and how to generally deploy and expose applications and services securely on Kubernetes. To me, this is such an important and also interesting project you should definitely learn more about. So I'd start with deploying MetalLB to K3s, which allows you to assign virtual IP addresses to service objects from your local network, and then start deploying an Ingress controller, something like Traffic, that will pick up one of these virtual IP addresses and can distribute the network traffic to individual applications on the cluster. This way you can also learn how to set up a reverse proxy between the client and the application layer, which gives you much more flexibility and security for your web services. Maybe you should also take a look at Cert Manager, which is a Kubernetes application that can issue secure TLS certificates for your web services. I know this topic is huge and it might be a bit tricky for beginners to get into it, but I can definitely say that I have learned so much from those type of projects because it will teach you a lot about how to run applications safe and also ready for a production environment. So not just in a lab scenario that is using unencrypted connections or exposing applications directly and so on. When you really want to learn Kubernetes and you want to know how to use it in the real world, I think there's no way around learning load balancers and Ingress controllers. Of course, as you can imagine, I've also made some tutorials about those applications. I've just mentioned the Traffic and Cert Manager. And MetalLB I haven't done yet, but I'm including a tutorial video about KubeVip, which is a similar application like MetalLB, in my next Raspberry Pi Kubernetes video, so definitely check this out. So yeah, learning about load balancers, Ingress controllers, and Kubernetes networking in general, this is a great way to get ready for the last project idea I've got for you. And this is using your Kubernetes cluster to actually do something useful with it and start deploying self-hosted applications in your home lab. It doesn't have to be anything specific, so just try to find solutions for problems that you want to solve or tasks that you have to do. For example, I love to deploy applications such as web servers like Nginx or monitoring solutions like Prometheus, Grafana, Uptime Kuma, maybe a home lab dashboard, something like Homepage, or automation tools and platforms like Kestra, Semaphore UI. You hopefully got enough inspiration for those type of apps from my other videos. But there are so many other nice self-hosted applications for home lab scenarios that you can start deploying in Kubernetes, and it is a great way to learn the technology because this exercise forces you to think about stuff like how do you set up a central storage for your applications, maybe how do you deal with backups or databases. And you most likely will run into so many new problems that you didn't face before when just installing demo applications. I can tell you from my experience that I've struggled a lot with a question like how do I set up a centralized storage for my applications. First, I've tried it with installing Longhorn a while ago, which was a terrible experience for me. It doesn't mean that Longhorn is a bad application, but for me it just didn't work great. Now I've settled on using my TrueNAS server as an NFS share and adding persistent volumes in Kubernetes to access them. Maybe this is the next rabbit hole you might want to get into. But to come to that point, you first have to deploy different types of applications that you really want to use. Because working on projects that you actually have a use case for will teach you so much more than any theoretical course or demo environment could teach you. Just a small advice, don't stress yourself too much with this project, so you don't have to migrate each and every application from your Docker servers to Kubernetes. This is, by the way, also a topic that I've made a video about, so there I've explained why I still prefer running some applications like databases, for example, on standalone servers or on Docker environments. But I can just tell you from my own experience, having a real use case for your Kubernetes cluster by deploying some workloads, this will help you so much in your learning progress. And when you've accomplished some cool projects with it, you can also stop calling yourself a beginner in Kubernetes. This is such a great feeling. So I hope this video gave you some ideas and inspiration to get started, and maybe you have found some projects that are interesting to you. Please don't stop learning and let me know what type of Kubernetes project sounds like fun to you. If you'd like me to cover anything specific in an upcoming tutorial video, then please also let me know. I'm always happy to find out what you guys like to see on the channel. But that's it for today. Thanks everybody for watching, and I'm gonna catch you in the next video. Take care. Bye bye.